Better.
Is this better right here?
Yes. We'll say talk some more.
Testing. This is a test. I'm talking and you all are listening.
Sound pretty good.
Okay, cool.
Cool. All right, let's see if the well, hello out there. If you happen to be on our YouTube, or I'm not sure if we're on Twitter or not because we're testing a brand new thing. Let's see if we're on Twitter. And we usually stream to audio on our website. I'm just going to not do that and just paste our link into our chat room for the folks. Oh, excellent connection. We are live on YouTube, so that's fun. Just don't know where to copy the link out of this UI. That's not fun. Maybe Riverside will actually give that to me. That would be cool. Let me look inside those settings. That. No. URL once you go live to share. I'm used to sharing audio only, so this is all new. It's not in my YouTube studio. If I just go to our public channel.
Oh, if you go to YouTube Studio,
Oh,
it'll
I
be
see
there's
it
a
on
separate
YouTube.
tab for live.
Oh, on YouTube Studio there is.
So YouTube Studio has a live tab.
I see like a go live button, but that takes me to like the live streaming thing that doesn't have like a URL. It says that we're live. Hello. You see it, Nick? You got the link?
I see it.
Hook me up with a link and I'll share it out. You can throw it in the chat here, or that works. Okay, boom. I'll share that here as well. Our log bot does not notify, doesn't know that we're on YouTube yet, so it says we're not live there. All right, there we go. That's enough sharing. And did we do our local starts? I don't think we did. I forgot altogether. So everybody can start their local recordings now. And then we'll do a clapper. So it's easy for me in post. Whenever y'all are ready. Yep.
Ready?
Okay, I'll say 3, like rock, paper, scissors, shoot. So we're going to go 3, 2, 1, shoot. Although instead of shoot, you should clap. In case you weren't sure.
3, 2, 1, shoot, clap.
Don't shoot me. Don't shoot me. All right, ready? 3, 2, 1. Well, that's some terrible latency right there. But good enough. Good enough for government work. Okay, so we're all here. We're ready for Jay's party. I am getting some serious latency lag. So if I talk over you, bear with me. Let me close down a few things so that I'm not doing that too much. Okay, pausing Dropbox sync. Why not? And Adam, is it Wathan or Wathan? I have to ask you every time you come on.
It is Wathan.
Oh, I got it wrong both times. It's neither of the above. Wathan.
That's right. Nailed it.
I need to burn that into my memory now. Wathan.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right. There it is. All right. Ready? Ready. I've been ready for like 10 minutes. Exactly. So, now, here we go. Intro music. Go. Say hi if you're in the chat. Good to see you all out there. Oh, yes. It's time once again, friends. My name is Jared, and I am here for a party. I'm joined by a couple of my internet friends. Regulars are here. Nick Nisi's in the house. What's up, Nick?
Oh, whoa, whoa. Hoi, hoi.
Hoy, hoy to you. And we're also joined by Faraz. Faraz, it's been a minute. Always happy to have you.
Yeah, good to be back on here.
And we have a special guest today. We're focusing on CSS for the day and Tailwind CSS. And we have the creator of Tailwind here, Adam Wathan. Adam, what's up?
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Glad to have you for sure. So the way I like to start this show out, we'll get into the nitty gritty of Tailwind and what you've been building and why people are so interested. It seems like everywhere I go on the internet these days, I see people talking about Tailwind, which is exciting, I'm sure. But I wanted to open up the panel for a question. This is not specifically for Adam, it's for any of us. Even maybe I'll answer it. No, I probably won't. But I'll let you guys go. And the question is, why do people complain so much about CSS? It's like one of the things that you hear all the time. There's memes and jokes about CSS. There's all sorts of tooling for CSS. On our front-end feud episode, when we asked, name something that front-end devs complain about, CSS was the number 3 answer, which was pretty high up the list. And so it seems like it is a thing that people struggle with, complain about, etc. I'm just curious, why do people think that is? If you don't raise your hand, I'll call on you. Yeah.
I'll go first.
All right, Faraz, thanks for biting.
Yeah. I think the number one reason is that people don't bother to learn it and they just expect to figure it out. This is also true of JavaScript. When you hear people complaining about JavaScript, oftentimes they're just winging it because it looks like another language that they may know. And, you know, it's not surprising that if you don't learn the fundamental concepts, then, you know, you're going to struggle to understand the interactions between the different parts of CSS. So that's my number one reason, I think, why people are hating on it.
I think that might be on point. There might be more to it as well. Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that maybe it's because there's no real, like when you're just learning to use it, there's no real constraints around it. And it's more of like a design eye that you need. And so like you have this language and you can make your content look like anything. And there's no, like without those constraints there, I think that it's hard to focus that. And then you don't spend a lot of time thinking about it and it just kind of cascades from there. Because it's a style sheet. Get it? No, okay.
See what you did there.
Yeah.
And
I like that.
So I think that might be.
So it's people don't learn it. It's also very general or very free. You can do almost anything with it, and so it's hard to focus in. Adam, what are your thoughts?
I got a few. I think one of the things is that it's actually really hard to get like really good at CSS. I think HTML is like funnily similar too. It's like one of these things that I think everybody knows a bit of, but there's actually not a huge number of people who invest that much time and effort into becoming the real experts in it the way that they do with JavaScript or other things. You know, I think a lot of people, they sort of like start with HTML and CSS, get into JavaScript, and then they feel like they sort of graduated to JavaScript from there. And like, they don't level up their CSS and HTML sort of knowledge the same way they do, because in some ways it's not as like exciting, because it feels like the potential for creating crazy stuff just isn't really there the same way that it is with JavaScript. So I think that's one thing. I think another is that even though like as a language, it's simple isn't the right word, but like learning the language is different from like learning how to like apply it in a maintainable code base and come up with like a system for writing CSS that feels like it scales with your application and that you can go back and maintain it. And there's been so many sort of competing philosophies for doing that over the years that it feels like there's no one true answer. You know what I mean? Like we get things like Bootstrap that come out, or Tailwind, or any framework. It feels like it's trying to be like the Rails for CSS as Rails is to Ruby. You know, it's like trying to provide some conventions and like happy paths and best practices and stuff. And I think people are craving that a lot in the CSS world. I think the other thing is that it hasn't been until like somewhat recently that we've gotten like the tools that we need in CSS to write things in a way that where it's even possible for them to be maintainable. Like before Flexbox, it was basically impossible to describe a lot of the layout stuff that we had to do in any sort of like declarative way. There was always just like magic, like hard coded numbers to make like this height over here match this thing over here, because you had like even just that simple pattern that you see all the time where it's like a bar with like a thing on the left and then a thing on the right. Like that's so trivial to do in Flexbox in a way where if one of those gets bigger, like the container gets bigger. But if you do that back in the day when we had to use floats for things, and maybe the thing on the right was like floated right, if that thing got bigger because it was user submitted content and the text wrapped or something, well now like the container isn't going to grow unless like like there was just like all sorts of it was hard to like connect things in a way where they actually were built in such a way that they were related to each other and not just like borderline absolute positioned on the screen. So
Right.
I think like the tooling and the features and stuff that CSS includes now is a lot better in that regard. So I think it's a lot easier to build more resilient user interfaces now, but I think it still carries around a lot of that bad reputation from before some of the tools that we have now were available.
Yeah. The platform has gotten a lot more complicated as
cold
well,
there.
right? Underneath it, more powerful, but more complicated because, in the bad old days, you could, maybe it was the good old days, you could just set a fixed width and be done, right? Like that's a thing that you could do. Now you just can't do that anymore because it won't work on all these different platforms. So the web platform has to live and breathe and work right in more places. And that's a great thing for the platform and for the users. But when it comes to time to implement that, there's just a lot more to do to get it to do it well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another
In addition,
thing
there's
about
kind of
CSS
this
too
inside
is
out.
that I
Go
think,
ahead.
there's a lot
No,
of latency going on right now.
There
Yeah,
is. I apologize.
yeah.
Just go ahead for us. Start from the top.
Yeah, I was gonna say so. One other thing too is a lot of the early parts of CSS were geared around textual documents, and people were using those features to do more complicated layouts that arguably weren't the purpose of those constructs. So things like floats were meant for like text wrapping around or an image, putting an image over to the left and letting text wrap around it. And that's kind of why I think the hacks like ClearFix and all the other stuff that people might have done back then were required. And so I think that's partially why CSS got like a reputation for being difficult. And if you were maybe learning it from scratch today, using the newer primitives, you wouldn't have as much trouble, or as it's not as bad as people make it out to be. But yeah, I think part of that is just using the tool for more than it was originally intended to be used for. And so it's taken a while for the spec to sort of catch up to what people want to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
There's also a inside out thing.
It just really must have been cold there in the shadow for CSS and the tooling around it, and just in the shadow of JavaScript and HTML.
That's true. I was gonna say there's like an inside out problem too, where it's easy to conflate your frustration with the technology when your actual frustration is your lack of design skills. Now I'm just speaking personally, right? Like I can get mad at the tool that I'm using. Sometimes you know what you want to design, and implementing it with this tool is difficult for whatever reason. And so then you get frustrated on that side. But then on the other side of the equation, you don't know what you want to design, or you're struggling with the actual design decisions, and there's nobody to take that out on but yourself or the tool that you're using to do the design. And so it's easy to use it as kind of a scapegoat. Just another take.
But then there's
that's a really
also
good point,
1,000
because
ways to do
CSS has to be
things.
flexible enough.
Well, this is terrible latency. It's
Go
killing
ahead.
us here. Go for Oz.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I'll disable my camera too, just in case that helps. I was going to say that so CSS has to be flexible enough to support any kind of design that you want to do when you as a developer might just be interested in like building an app that looks like 90% of other apps out there. So that a lot of the elements that you might want to include in your app are sort of basic component type things, or like I want to stick border radius on this thing, and I want there's probably like 4 or 5 different border radius sizes that I might want to use, but CSS can't build in constructs at that level of granularity, because it needs to be flexible enough for like a lot more than that. And so if you're just trying to get stuff done, it actually is helpful to have more constraints, and to save you from shooting yourself in the foot if you aren't the best designer. And so I think that's kind of where Tailwind comes in.
Yeah, so Adam, it's a good primer for you to hop into Tailwind and why you started it in the first place, because there's lots of frameworks out there. You mentioned a few of them. Some are popular, some are less popular. There's different approaches. One of the things that you find often with like a Bootstrap or a Foundation is you start to have websites that all look somewhat similar, or at least widgets and components where you're like, oh, this is a Bootstrap site. And so that's one of the complaints with frameworks. But what were your thoughts around frameworks whenever you're like, I'm going to start something brand new? Surely you're not happy with what's currently available. So where were you when you decided Tailwind?
Yeah. So I can tell the whole story. Hopefully I can try to do it in the shortest possible way. But the origin story is really just like I was a Bootstrap fan for years and years and years, and I'm still a big fan of the project and the people involved. And I've always looked up to that team for a long time. And I was using Bootstrap for everything in like the Bootstrap 3 days. And then when Bootstrap 4 came out, they were moving from less to Sass, which I think made sense at the time because Sass had just kind of established itself as like the winner, in the CSS preprocessor space, I think. But I just like really had a soft spot in my heart for less over Sass. There's a bunch of little differences in how it worked that really appealed to me more. And one of them was like the fact that in less, classes could be used as mixins. And this is something that's carried through all the way to Tailwind now, with like our add apply feature is based on what you used to be able to do in less. So when Bootstrap made the switch to Sass, I had to decide like, okay, am I either going to move to Sass, or am I going to just like try and write my CSS from scratch? And I was working on a new side project with Steve, who's like my partner at Tailwind Labs. And I decided, let's just try and like do all the CSS from scratch on this project and put together a little kind of toolkit for ourselves. So there was never any like intention to build a framework from the beginning. We were just kind of writing the CSS for one particular project. And I kind of built everything I needed from scratch, very Bootstrap inspired, and sort of like the naming approach for classes and stuff like that. But as I started trying to like carry this set of files around with me from like abandoned side project A to abandoned side project B to abandoned side project C, I would find myself like changing little things about it every time, right? Like, okay, well, the buttons need to look different in this project or different in this project. But there was little utilities like the ones that Bootstrap even had at the time for like text alignment or margin or padding or whatever, that just like stayed stable from project to project. Those are like the only things that like outlived one project. So I found like this set of CSS files I was dragging around from project to project started to be more like utility focused and less focused on like button classes and form inputs and stuff like that. And I was like really enjoying sort of working this way and building out entire interfaces using like utility classes instead of using like component classes and stuff. And around this time is when I started to like learn that other people had created tools like this too, that I had never seen. And if I had seen, probably would have dismissed, because at first glance, it just like looks like such a terrible idea. So like my friend David Hemphill had made a CSS framework called Beard CSS that was like the same sort of thing. And there was tachyons and like base CSS. And I think like TED had like shed CSS. There's like all these different things that they all look terrible, just like Tailwind looks. And but I found that I had just sort of like landed in the same place that a lot of these other people had that had built some of these other frameworks, and realized that this is actually kind of a fun way to work. So around that time, a friend of mine, Jonathan Renink, who worked with me early on Tailwind CSS, and this is kind of like where we started working on it together, mentioned to me that he was about to start doing a redesign of the SaaS app that he maintains, and wanted to know more about how I'd been doing CSS stuff lately. And I told him I'm doing this way, and he's like, "That looks ridiculous, but I trust you, so I want to try it." So he tried it out, and he was like, "This is awesome." So then we kind of like worked together to figure out how can we like, because we both had just like separate copies of this like copy and paste framework essentially, right? That we were just like editing for our own projects. So him using it on his project and me using it on the projects me and Steve were working on was like the impetus for trying to figure out how can we extract like a shared core and create something where there's like one source of truth that we're both leveraging in some way. And that's when we just started working on trying to extract it into something that could be like installed as a dependency for someone essentially. So we just kind of hashed that out together, trying to make sure that like, okay, well, I want to add this opinion. Is that compatible with like your site? Well, no, like that's too opinionated because of XYZ. And it's like a forcing function for figuring out what is like the universal set of styles that we can provide and what level of customization and stuff do we need to be able to provide for it to be able to work, like changing your color palettes or your shadows or whatever. So that's where all Tailwind sort of customization stuff came from. And originally it was all written in Less, right? Because that was the reason why I was even doing this whole thing instead of just using Bootstrap. But as like the level of customization started to get more and more sophisticated, we outgrew the ability to do it with Less, because Less was not designed as like a general purpose programming language. So then my friend David, who had built like Beard CSS, suggested trying to write it in Post CSS, and I was like, what does that even mean to write a framework in Post CSS? Isn't Post CSS like a tool for adding vendor prefixes using auto prefixer? Like how do you take like what
Right.
Post CSS does and like use that to make a CSS framework? And he kind of explained to me some of the tricks that people had been using, where you can take like like an at rule, like a media query or like an import statement, and you can make like custom ones using your own keywords, and PostCSS will parse them just fine, because all it's trying to do is like parse CSS-ish stuff. It's not like it has like a hard-coded list of what's allowed to come after an at sign, you know? So people were doing stuff like creating custom properties, for example, like Lost Grid is like a PostCSS plugin that adds its own CSS properties that when you crawl that AST with PostCSS, it finds those and sort of expands them into like multiple properties or creates multiple rules from it. And that's when we realized, well, maybe we can do like an at Tailwind rule that is like a spot for Tailwind to just like inject a bunch of styles generated from like some configuration once it finds that rule. So when I realized like what you could do and what the sort of tricks were for like injecting CSS that was generated elsewhere, I started porting everything over to PostCSS in JavaScript, where I could actually write tests and like make sure that the thing actually worked. And it was awesome. So that's like how it kind of came to be. And we released the very, very, very first version on like Halloween night 2017, I think. So a little over 3 years ago. And people were excited about it. And it's kind of started slowly growing after that. And then in 2019, I went full-time working on it after we had released the Refactoring UI book a couple months before. And then, yeah, so since then, since January 2019, I've been working full-time on Tailwind-related stuff, and now we have a team of 6 people, including me and Steve, all working full-time on this sort of stuff. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing, which I think has been awesome. And I think just because of the fact that most open source projects don't get to have teams of 6 people working on them full time. But yeah, so that's what we do every day now, is work on stuff related to Tailwind. And it's been really fun.
That's amazing. I think we'll just break right there so we can get into the details on the next side of the break. Frost, how you doing down there, friend? I think you're the most latent of all of us.
I'm doing okay. Can you hear me fine?
Oh, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay. That's better.
All right. You've entered the break. Feel free to step outside of the cabin or go to the bathroom if anybody wants to. Get a drink. Otherwise, we can rock into the next segment. Nick, what are you thinking over there?
Sure. If you want to.
It's up to you, Nick.
So Adam, I don't know if you can tell, but I've been saying weird random things like it must be cold there in my shadow. I'm trying to work in the lyrics to Wind Beneath My Wings while we talked about this.
I have not.
So
I
if you
have
hear me
not
going
put that
off-
together.
I didn't think
but,
you were anywhere near putting it because the latency kills the vibe. But I'm like, now it just seems like
Yeah.
you're a weirdo, Nick. I'm like, I don't know if we can go the whole episode. Like, we can, because since we're on the break, this part will be, not on the show. But we want to put together an Easter egg because we want to call this the Tailwind Beneath Your Wings is the name of this episode.
Okay.
And we were hoping that Nick could somehow say Nick and me. I'm kind of backing out,
Yeah.
but I'll do it with Nick.
We're running a podcast.
Ooh, good thing we're on
Okay.
the break. We're just hoping we can utter each line, each lyric throughout the show. Oh, look at that. Water delivery.
good.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So if we say things in roundabout ways, or you're kind of wondering like, what the heck is that guy talking about? Just play it cool. And
Yeah.
All right, I will.
it'll
I
all work
will.
out in the end.
I was wondering what Nick was doing there. I thought that was like more poetic than it needed to be.
Especially since he like stomped on you to say it. Like there's like
Yeah.
a latency moment and he's like, you interrupted me
Yeah.
for that?
Sorry about that.
All right. I think it's better with the four of us at least in on it, and then the show can still be blind to it. So going back in, hold on. Crap, I forgot to mark the break. Let me mark that. Okay, so I have a good place to take us back in from where we were. And do it with a line. Gosh, it's so hard. These are not things that you would normally say, Nick.
Maybe you.
Okay, these are not things I would normally say. Okay, I'll try the next one. This one makes sense.
You got a lot of lines to get through. This is going to be.
There's a lot of them. Oh, you got them pulled up now? That'll give you a hint of what's coming. We don't have to do them in order, do we, Nick? Because we'll splice it back together. In the right.
Yeah, you can splice it back.
That was.
Oh, you want to go in order?
Yeah.
That's even harder.
Yeah.
I guess that's less work on me when I create the clip. But okay, the next one's easy then. Sam, you mentioned it was 2017 when it first came out. How long were you working on it beforehand? Because to never have sunlight on your face for all that time, it's got to be a while. You want to release it, right?
Yeah. So I think I started on it in maybe like April. I mean, it depends how you look at it. I've been like carrying it around in some shape or form for years and years, and I started working on it originally on this side project called Digest that me and Steve started working on in like 2014, which was like a tool for teams to share links with each other for articles they thought were interesting. And then I used it again on, I don't know how many other side projects, at least 2 or 3. And then I finally brought it over again for this app Kitetail that we were working on in like the spring of 2017. And I had been like live streaming all my work on that app. You can find there's like probably 40 YouTube live streams. So I was just building the app from scratch, all on live stream. And the most like common question that came up on all the live streams was like, what CSS framework is that? What CSS framework is that? And that's when I kind of realized that like, oh, I mean, I never really intended to even share it because it didn't even really occur to me that it was interesting to the general public, but because I'd been working in public and everyone had been kind of asking for it, I thought maybe I'll just like bundle this up into like an open source thing. And originally I was just going to like release it sort of under the namespace for the app, almost like GitHub Primer, which is like their like internal thing. That was kind of the original idea, but with where we ended up, it was just like much more universal and felt like it could just be a thing with its own name. So we did that. And then of course that side project got abandoned and now I just work on the CSS framework itself instead. So yeah.
It's funny how that happens.
Yeah.
And surely you could have never imagined that it would come to this. Like, this is like a business now. I mean, it's an open source CSS framework and you've built a business around it. and people are giving
Yeah.
people are saying, "Shut up and take my money." I mean, isn't that exciting and weird?
It's definitely exciting. I I didn't know what I expected, I guess. Like, I didn't really intend to build a business around it, but what seems to happen was like the CSS framework was taking off, and it felt like this is like the first thing. This is the thing that I've worked on that has had like the highest potential for impact, you know, in terms of how many people can benefit from it and stuff. It's like, of all the things I'd worked on, this was the thing that I'm most likely to be like known for. And it seemed like unlike a lot of other sort of open source type tools, there are like a established sort of precedents for people making money on CSS framework related stuff. You know, like Bootstrap has a theme store, like Theme Forest is like an enormous business on its own, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like there's a pretty straightforward sort of path to like trying to do some sort of commercial stuff around it. So it felt like we should try to do that. And I think like the approach that we ended up taking, we released this product called Tailwind UI, which is designed to just be like a giant directory of like examples of different UI patterns and components built with Tailwind CSS. Is a little bit different than like this sort of traditional theme store approach, I think, but is kind of rooted in the same sort of idea. It's like people who are building stuff are not always good at design, and or not even always good at taking a design and converting it into like a real code. And there's history proving that people will pay for that sort of thing. So that seems like a good way to try and fund the development of our open source stuff. So we released that product in February of this year, and that combined with like the refactoring UI book, which was also me and Steve did that together. Those are kind of all under the same like company, right? And those two products together are sort of what pay the bills and let us work on Tailwind and work on like headless UI, which is like another open source tool that we have been working on. And that sort of, I mean, there's probably God knows how many other things that we work on too that aren't coming to mind right now. But you know, for the most part, out of the 6 people that work at the company, 90% of the time is spent working on open source related stuff. I think we only really like Steve and one other person spend the bulk of their time working on the paid stuff. So it's really cool to be able to like sort of commercialize it in a sense without sort of like foregoing work on the thing that like got us here in favor of like working on all the commercial stuff. Because I think that's always like the risk, you know. Everyone always says like when you're building an open source tool, the way you should monetize is by building some like commercial business around it, but and then you can work on the open source stuff using the money from that. But like that's sort of like presuming that you're going to be able to invent some business that only takes like 15% of your time but pays you a full-time salary somehow to like work on all the open source stuff. Like they make it sound a little easier than it really is, you know what I mean?
It's like now you have 2 jobs
most of the time. Like you still can only do open source on evenings and weekends because like the rest of your time is like struggling to make this real business actually work. So I'm really fortunate to be in a position where like we actually have found a way to spend a lot of time on the open source stuff, or to at least like have the margins to be able to invest in hiring people that can focus entirely on the open source stuff. Because that's what feeds the commercial stuff anyways, right? Like it's easy. It would be easy in our situation to sort of forget like what got us here. And I think investing just in growing the framework has been like the most effective thing we've been able to do for growing the business too. So it's very just like it just all kind of works, you know, which has been great. So
yeah, that's great. I've looked at that refactoring UI book and gone through it, spent a lot of time going through it, and I really like that it seems to tie back a lot to like Tailwind and how you might do things with that, but also like some of the theory behind, you know, colors is the one, and colors and white space are the ones that really stuck out to me. And it was really helpful because like that's the thing, kind of like I said, going into CSS, it's like I could do anything. I could have, you know, 40 pixels of white space over here and 27 over here, and no real rhyme or reason for that. But this kind of helps me understand the theory of it, and then Tailwind kind of helps you stay consistent within that. So through that book and that open source work, you know, your content is really content to let me shine, and that's your way.
That's awesome. Thanks, man. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I also really like how you're like it's a really good example of you know, open source, sustainable open source, you know, that works. There's like a lot of reasons why like open source struggles to get funding, and that's something I'm really interested in. But you have you know, you check a lot of the boxes that I think make it a little bit easier to build
Yeah.
a business on top of what you're doing, because you have an end user facing project, so people actually know that they're using Tailwind because they
Yep.
chose to use
Right.
it, or someone on their team chose to use it. So a lot of open source is like a dependency that's somewhere deep in the tree, and no one even knows that it exists.
It's only
And
really like the leaves
know,
of the
and
tree that can really have the chance to even be successful in that regard. You know, if you're not building like the framework that people are using,
Right.
then it's hard. Like even like post CSS as a tool is going to struggle to be funded compared to us, even though we're built
Mhm.
like directly on top of that. You know, yeah, I totally agree
Totally.
with
It's
you.
kind of like on a movie set, like the person who's in
Yeah,
front of the camera is the one who gets all the money and all the stardom, and then like everybody else, like maybe you're a grip. Okay, that's not like a thing you go to school for. Maybe you're like a cinematographer, and no one's ever going to know unless you watch the end credits, like who was a cinematographer. Now, at a certain point, those are so famous that people start to learn them. But the analogy, I think, holds to a certain degree. It's kind of like a rich get richer thing, or it's not really that, but it's kind of like certain projects just lend themselves to this success, and the other ones don't, just by the nature of the thing they are.
And there's even projects that are like
well,
user facing, like things you work with day to day that are still not obviously commercializable, you know, like even like Vue.js, like Evan gets to work full time on Vue.js, but not because he has like some magical model in terms of some service that he sells or anything like that. Like he's does really well through like Patreon stuff. And but even then the Patreon stuff is people like companies who want to like advertise on the Vue.js docs, essentially. Like that's where the very bulk of all that comes from. So really he's in like the advertising business, essentially, you know. And there's lots of other tools that are things people interact with directly day to day that still haven't had success there. So it's tough. The whole open source funding problem is like very, very real for sure. And I'm you know, we're lucky to be in the spot that we're in, where we're working on like the exact right type of tool, where there's like a lot of history of people paying for things like this already. But that's just because of the nature of the tool, you know, not because we've figured out anything that anyone else is trying to figure out.
Well, yeah, that's really great though. It's good to have an example of someone making it. So
it's also a clear separation of concerns, or at least the product versus the open source free stuff is very clear. It's like, this is the framework to build things, and then by the way, if you want some pre-built things, here they are, right? Like that's your delineation, right? It's like, here's the widgets, Tailwind UI,
Yeah,
and then you can build your own widgets, of course, but like a lot of us aren't very good at building those widgets. Going back to like the struggles with CSS, it's actually our design skills that need help, and so you're actually helping us with, don't give me a blank canvas and a tool to paint, right? Like, give me a paint by numbers, or give me the numbers that are already the form I can just put things into. I'm willing to pay for that because exactly.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we're definitely like selling design more than anything else, which I think, like we've kind of been talking about, lots of precedent for that, and also just like a pretty in demand kind of skill, right? So it's been nice to be able to tie those two things together, to have like a design co-founder, you know, so that we're able to even do that, because not every open source tool has a on staff designer, you know. So yeah.
So are there other people building competitors to your business side? I don't want to say like competitors, but like, are there other widget libraries? Are there other UIs where you can say it's Tailwind based, but here's our philosophy, or we're doing this, so that there's selection? Or is it build all your own stuff or use Tailwind UI?
Yeah, there's definitely other stuff out there. You know, there are people who sell like Tailwind UI kits or Tailwind themes. and stuff like that. And that's totally cool. I think
Yeah.
I'm happy to see like other people doing stuff like that, and for there to be other things existing for sure. We're like, obviously there's always like some stress and pressure around the fact that like we have to like build the building blocks and the commercial stuff, and then people who compete with us they get to like take advantage of all the work that we're doing on Tailwind without having to maintain it or invent it or come up with the new features. They can just focus on like the commercial side of things. But fortunately, we've been able to create like a similar sort of structure just internally, by having like people who spend their time on the open source stuff and then people who spend their time on the commercial stuff. So, I don't really see it as a disadvantage anymore. It used to stress me out more when we had fewer people and had less resources, and I would spend like 2 months developing a bunch of Tailwind CSS features, which was 2 months that I couldn't work on the commercial side of things. But now I think, it's working out well. And thankfully, like just like being able to call our stuff like the official stuff is like a huge advantage, of course. So fingers crossed that no one ever eats our lunch completely, but for now it's working out well, and it's been good that we can kind of do both.
It's a benefit. They're always walking a step behind.
That's right, until AWS comes out with Tailwind widgets as a service.
Yeah, exactly. Except no one will be able to figure out how to use those ones. How to even like log in. You got to create the IAM user to be able to find the right table or whatever. And
right.
But I mean, even if they're commercially successful, they're still building their business on top of Tailwind. So you're really the one with all the glory.
In a way, yeah. Yeah, as long as our business is still doing well, like I'm okay with that. But yeah, it's true. Like it's good. I like to see like people doing anything with the tool, right? I think the right attitude to have for sure is to be like enthusiastic about what other people in the community are doing. Especially as long as like you're putting food on the table, you know what I mean? I could see how it could get stressful otherwise, but right now it's we're not struggling in that way. So it's easy to be supportive and enthusiastic about this cool stuff that people are doing. Like a friend of mine yesterday just released like this Chrome extension. I think it's actually for Firefox too, called Windy, that lets you like basically hover over like any like DOM element, and it'll read all the CSS for that and all its children and reconstruct like the HTML and try to recreate it with pure Tailwind classes. So you can copy like any piece of any website as Tailwind. Like obviously it's not going to be totally 100% bulletproof, but it's surprisingly good. So even like, something has like a padding left of 13 pixels, Windy will figure out what's the closest value that exists in Tailwind and sort of round it to that. Same with like font sizes and colors and stuff like that. So yeah, people are doing all sorts of cool stuff, and it's really crazy to have built something that has people even excited enough about it to invest time into like creating crazy tools like that. So
that's what happens while you're the one with all the strength in the CSS realm.
We should take a break right now. I have a feeling we're just tanking this show. Adam's over here like, why am I on this show? These guys just keep saying the weirdest stuff to me. This is good. Can it be auto-tuned? Well,
I feel like it's only going to get fucking worse from here too. Like,
some of these are really hard to say.
Especially once you get close to the end where you have to just like repeat things.
Right. Well, I think we're just going to go up to the first for You Are the Wind Beneath My Wings. It's probably what we're trying to get to, which is going to be a struggle because we're in our last segment already. But like some of these.
Oh, yeah. We're like 40% of the way there.
Yeah. But a beautiful face without a name for so long. I mean, how does that make any sense? Unless I go back to like your origin story. You're like, so back when Tailwind was, maybe I can do that. Yeah. So I think what we're going to have to do to make this worth this ridiculous effort that we're going through. Although Rebecca in the chat's really enjoying it. She wants it auto-tuned, and she's having fun with it, is we might have to put the actual song at the very beginning of the episode so that everybody's like, oh, that's cool. And then they'll see it coming through in the conversation, because otherwise they might not tune into the end to find the Easter egg or whatever we do with the clip. What are your thoughts on that, Nick? Or how do you see this manifesting? Because especially because every time you say something, Frost laughs, and it's like it doesn't make any sense why he's laughing right now, unless you're in on the joke already. Anyways, I'm talking.
You can edit that out though. It's a separate track.
That's
right?
true.
You can edit my laugh out.
Totally. But I don't want to. I like the laughs. The laughs are good. All right. Well, where should we go from here into the next break? We haven't talked too much about, like, it's been kind of meta so far. We haven't talked too much about like what's it feel like, what, you know, how do you the integrations, or like what's it look like to actually pick it up and use it, or, you know, etc. Do you think that's worth plumbing into a little bit, just because we've been very much abstract so far? Or comparisons? I mean, you did some of that in the origin story, was like how it compares to other things.
We can also talk about the plans for maybe React components, or if anything like that's coming down the pipeline, because that's something that I would want to use.
Yeah, I think I'll throw that in the integrations conversation. So yes, I think we should probably get into some of that nitty gritty, since we have been pretty high level so far. What do you think, Adam?
Yeah, I will talk about whatever you want.
Okay. What about 1980s era hit pop songs?
Yeah, we can talk about that. Let's keep it subtle though.
Let's keep it subtle. We'll do our best. All right, Nick, you got a game plan for this next one?
This is,
I mean, you could
like,
I know.
one.
You could say like, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. You know, I only had heard about Tailwind before. It was merely a beautiful face.
Oh, that sounds great, Frost. Okay, you're on it.
Yep.
No, but oh god, I don't want to say this line.
Oh, this is gonna be the best breaks episode ever for our post show. You don't want to say that line? Right. It was so good. The way you did it was perfect. I'll say it. Okay. Do you want to open the segment with it?
Though, and it's going to be like 150% more.
It is. Like, I might have to turn off my camera for a second so I can listen to it.
All right.
Okay, go.
Well, I'm so glad we have you here because for a long time I just heard about. No, it's terrible. It's terrible. Awkward.
Take two.
Adam, I'm so glad we have you here. For a long time I just heard about. It was merely a beautiful face without a name for so long, but you know, now we can actually ask you all of our questions about the nitty gritty. So let's get into it.
Yeah. Sweet.
So maybe we could start with talking about the editor integrations.
Yeah, sure. So we have like an official VS Code plugin that was actually like developed by Brad, who works with us before he worked with us. And that's kind of how I got to know him and why we hired him. And it's pretty awesome. Like it'll, let me think of all the cool stuff it does. It does like linting. So it can tell you like pretty interesting things. Like one of the things that trips people up sometimes with Tailwind is like adding two classes to an element that are kind of competing with each other. So like PT5 and PT8, you know, like which one of those is actually going to take effect? Is it going to be 5 or 8? You shouldn't really put both those on an element. So it can like underline those and say, hey, it looks like you have like two conflicting CSS classes. Or gives you autocomplete for everything. That's like really intelligent autocomplete, which is great because there's about 6,000 million classes to remember. It can do cool stuff like adds like a little color swatch in front of utility classes that are like color related, so you can like pick them out more quickly. It gives you autocomplete for like some of the CSS based functionality that we have, like that add apply rule, or we have like some functions for referencing values from like your Tailwind theme and stuff like that. So that's kind of what that does. And I know that JetBrains just added like official, well, like first class Tailwind CSS support to their IDEs too. But I haven't tried it yet because I don't actually use like WebStorm or PHP Storm or anything. But from what I've heard from people who do, they're pretty excited about it. So those are the only two that I know of so far.
I can throw in one.
Yeah.
The one I'm using is COC Tailwind IntelliSense, which is a plugin for COC, which is a plugin for NeoVim.
Nice.
And so I get IntelliSense in NeoVim with that, and it's wonderful because that IntelliSense is just a beautiful smile to hide the pain of having to remember all of those classes.
Yeah. Does that use like a language server to do all that stuff?
Yeah.
So is it using
I
like
think
the
so.
same one that we built for the VS Code one? I wonder. It'd be cool if it was.
I would assume
Yeah.
so, just based on the other COC plugins. Like that's how
Mhm.
they all work.
That's cool.
But
Nick, you go through such crazy.
Yeah, I imagine an editor
constraints
plugin
to
makes it a
get
lot.
your Vim setup going. Like, you'll do anything to get it somehow into Vim.
that's
that's true.
that is what all Vim users are like, man. Like Vim at all costs.
That's right.
Like that is like that.
A plugin to run a plugin that is forked off of a VS
Yeah.
Code plugin,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
used in a.
And you didn't mention that NeoVim is like a variant of Vim,
Right.
which is a variant of VI. So like, there's so many layers.
Nick, I know I
here.
pick
It's
on
not
you a
long
lot for
until,
this
like,
Vim
EX in there
stuff,
somewhere.
but did you ever know that you're my hero? I mean, I
Thank
can't
you.
believe what you do to get your Vim setup working. It's heroic.
One day we're gonna have like Chromium windows in like Vim drop downs just to be able to like do the stuff people need to be able to do, and everyone's just gonna forget that like the reason they use Vim is because it's supposed to be fast with low memory usage, and really it's just because they hate arrow keys, I guess. But
I actually gave up on Vim because it slowed down so much. I was like, if it's going to be slow, then I might as well use something that's slow that I like a little bit more. I didn't give up on it. I still use it, but you know what I mean, as my daily code editor.
yeah,
All my plugins slowed down. I can't believe, Nick, that yours is still fast with how much junk you shove into your Vim. How is it fast?
52 plugins plus 14 COC plugins.
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
it's still fast though. It's everything I would like it to be.
Wow.
nice.
Must be run on that M1 chip or something.
Yeah, I imagine
Soon.
having the editor integration sounds like it could be a game changer for using something like this. I had tried. I used tachyons,
Yeah.
which is kind of similar to
Yeah.
Tailwind. You mentioned it earlier, and you basically can't use it, especially when you're learning, unless you have like the tab open to the official
Yeah.
docs at all times, and you're always command Fing and searching, finding like the class to use for the CSS that you would like to
Yeah.
write. And so having that just built in directly seems like real game changer.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful for learning it. We also put out this like online Tailwind playground a couple months ago, which is at like play.tailwindcss.com, which is kind of like a code pen specifically for Tailwind that has all the same IDE integration stuff built right into it in the browser, but it actually works even better than the one in VS Code because we just have more control over it. So, and the main reason that works better is because we have like the live preview and they can kind of talk to each other. So one of the cool things that you can do in the playground is when like the autocomplete pops up to show you like all the classes that it's suggesting based on what you've typed. So maybe you type like bg-red-, it's going to suggest like red 50, red 100, red 200, whatever. As you hit like up and down between all those options, the live preview will actually like update immediately without even having to like hit enter to select a color. So you can like design in the browser just by like hitting up and down between the different options and seeing things like preview instantly. So yeah, that's become like a pretty cool way for people to learn too. One of the projects that I want to tackle soon is building like the way the playground works. There's like a share button that just creates like a permalink to whatever like that instance is. I want to build like a series of those that like link to each other, that is almost like an interactive Tailwind tutorial that just like without having to build our own custom tutorial thing, because all it is a series of like playgrounds, you know what I mean? I think that would be kind of cool to be able to have a link where you could just go somewhere and there's a link right in there to go to the next one after you've kind of read and tinkered with whatever the example is and stuff like that. And I think that'd be kind of fun.
Yeah, I use it actually in a very similar way to the way I use the TypeScript playground, which is like to demo out things and share with teammates how to do this with TypeScript. I do that with Tailwind as well.
That's cool.
It's really nice for
that. It's been so helpful for us for troubleshooting things for people in like our Discord and stuff. Before it used to be like, oh, send us a link to a code sandbox or something, and it's kind of hard to set up because there's like a build time thing with Tailwind, especially if like someone's having an issue with like some custom configuration, like you need to be able to recreate that. So all that stuff works in our playground. So someone can just send us a quick link and we can figure it out right there. So that's made customer support way easier. So it's been definitely worth it.
Do you advocate for people to like learn Tailwind and use Tailwind kind of forever, or is there like a educational graduation where like at a certain point you won't need it anymore, or is it supposed to be like it is a utility framework? So like even as a expert carpenter, I still use my utilities. Like, is that more like that? Like, what would you think? Would people eventually be like, I used to use Tailwind, but then I learned how it worked, and now I have my own little thing that I use that's lighter or better or customized? What do you think on that?
I mean, I'm obviously biased.
Sure, but like, what would you think? Yeah,
my personal stance is like, to me, it feels like I finally like have a unified theory of CSS for my own projects.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I tried every approach under the sun, and you can find articles I've written on the internet that I completely disagree with now from like when I used to recommend doing things differently. And now it feels like a solved problem to me. Like, it doesn't feel like something I think about. It's like when you find that like one brand of jeans or whatever that's like, okay, that's it. Now like that question of like what jeans should I own is now no longer in my head. You know, like I know what ones I'm supposed to buy.
Done with that decision.
That's solved, you know, or like toothpaste or deodorant or something.
Right.
You know, it's like, no, this is the one that I get. Like that doesn't occupy any space in my mind anymore. So I don't know, there's obviously like alternate approaches and stuff that have merit, especially like I think like CSS and JS is super interesting if you're building apps where you can use that approach. And I think people are kind of still figuring out like the best version of that, you know, but there's lots of benefits to it and interesting things you can do there. But not everyone is building like a React SPA, so not everyone can really use that stuff. Tailwind, I think, is like a really great trade-off from my perspective of like something that kind of scales well, is fast to learn and lets you kind of make local changes like really easily, has lots and lots of flexibility and customization stuff, but like works everywhere. You know, works on a WordPress theme, or works in a React app. It's just CSS at the end of the day, right? Which is always going to work. Yeah, I think personally, I don't expect, I don't think there's like this natural path of outgrowing it anyways. Because to me, the biggest benefit is that I don't have to write CSS in the same way anymore. Like you don't spend time thinking of stupid class names for things. You just like put an existing class on something and you're done, you know? I think that's like the biggest benefit to it, that people don't understand how big of a benefit it's going to be until they actually experience it, is that you're not jumping to the CSS file and think, or well, usually the workflow would be you're in your HTML file, right? And you're like, okay, I created this div, I created this other div. Well, I got to style this div. So I guess I need like some sort of identifier to slap on it so that I can like select that identifier in my CSS. So what am I going to call it? Well, I guess it's on the profile page, and it kind of is the thing that the avatar is inside of. So is it like profile page avatar wrapper? Okay, I guess, you know, like it's so slow compared to just like, well, I know I need to make this display flex and align item center. So flex item center, moving on to the next problem, you know?
Especially when you're on a team and you're
so
wondering
from that,
what
do
they're
you ever
doing.
You might have just answered that.
Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, sorry, you might have just answered that, but do you ever find yourself going in there into CSS and writing classes using the apply, or do you consider
there's only a
like
couple situations I'll do it. One is for like typography content stuff. So say you have like, you're working on a blog and all your blog content comes from Markdown. Obviously you can't like go and litter your Markdown with all these utility classes. You have to be able to like target it from like a higher level. So I'll always create some sort of class like that. And we released a Tailwind plugin that kind of gives you some sensible defaults to this. It gives you like this pros class. So you just slap like pros on like whatever div has like the Markdown rendered content. And it's just like going to look pretty good. So that's a situation where I would have written custom CSS and still sometimes do. And then the only other time I really do it is when I find like that I'm missing a feature in Tailwind. So like the other day I was like rebuilding the allbirds.com website on a live stream, and they had this like horizontal scrolling nav bar, nav bar, by default, like the scroll bar is visible in this thing that's like 15 pixels high, and that just like looks awful. So in theirs, they hide the scroll bars, and we don't have utilities in Tailwind for hiding the scroll bar. So my approach is always like, okay, well, I need to hide the scroll bars. I'm not going to go create a CSS class for like navbar and add like the scroll bar CSS there. I'm going to figure out what feature do I wish Tailwind had already, which is like some sort of class for hiding scroll bars, like very, evil, unsemantic class name, So whenever I end up writing custom CSS, a lot of the time it's more from that perspective. It's like kind of extending Tailwind with Tailwindy type of things, not just like writing custom kind of project specific CSS. It's like surprisingly rare how often I need to write custom CSS for things. Like I'll reach for JavaScript before I'll reach for custom CSS a lot of the time, just because it's like I want to avoid opening that like Pandora's box of like, now there is custom CSS in this project. You know what I mean? I just want to resist that as long as possible. Like I'm already writing HTML no matter what. A website cannot exist without HTML. So like that is foregone, I must write HTML. But do I need to write CSS? I don't know. Like if I don't have to, but I do have to write HTML, then maybe I can just do it all there,
Yeah, that really makes me feel like this project is making it so that I don't have to write a whole lot of custom CSS. And when I see that, it makes me take notice. Like if I'm in a code review, like I really scrutinize why custom CSS is showing up in here, because it seems like I might be able to do almost everything with Tailwind, or if you're trying to repeat things like that, I might have like a custom button style where I might just apply that in a custom class.
That's another like valid situation for sure, like extracting some repetition. But I think you have to be careful, like not to extract stuff that would be better extracted into like a Vue component or a React component, or even like a Twig partial or something. Because I find as soon as there's like more than one HTML element involved, that like a CSS class is usually not the right place to try and remove that duplication. Because now, you might have like created a card class and a card header and like a card body or whatever, but you still have to repeat that HTML structure from memory every single time you want to create a card. So you haven't actually like extracted all the duplication. Whereas if you can extract that into something that holds the HTML structure and the styles together, now there's like a single source of truth for both of those things. Whereas just using CSS, all you've done is create a single source of truth for the styles. And I find like styles and markup structure are, as much as people like want to pretend that they're not like linked, they're pretty linked, CSS Zen Garden, I think, has demonstrated that you can do crazy things without changing the HTML structure. But I'm not sure that that's actually the way like teams really want to work most of the time.
Yeah, like CSS Zen Garden is like the thing,
problem,
right?
You know what I mean?
Like CSS Zen Garden is the thing
awesome
that you should do. That's crazy. Like that's the one time that you would want to do that, is if you're creating the CSS Zen Garden,
Exactly. Like that's how I see it. I see it as like it's like a challenge. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's like, okay, how can I get from this side of the room to the other side of the room without touching the floor? It's like it's a fun challenge, I think, but I don't know that it should be like the default way that we actually try to write things. I always make this joke, like with CSS Zen Garden, obviously it's like a cool project and a really cool demo of like what's possible. Like definitely not slagging on it in any way.
Yeah, totally.
But people always say like, look how like different you can make this site look without changing the HTML, just by changing the style sheet. It's like, man, you should see how different I can make a site look by just changing the HTML and not changing the CSS file at all. You know what I mean? I can
right.
Like, yeah, with Tailwind, I will give you one style sheet that you can use to build 50 different sites, but where all you did was change the HTML. You never touched the CSS, and none of the content is the same somehow, and none of the layout is the same.
Right. Yeah.
So
one of the things that happens with CSS, we didn't bring it up at the top, but like it seems only additive. This is one of the problems that we have, is like deleting CSS rarely happens, especially in teams, because you don't know what's being used and stuff. And surely a Tailwind solves that problem, right? Because you're not writing a whole bunch of CSS, you're reusing the same stuff. And this may sound facetious, but like take it seriously. You are adding tons of HTML classes like in your HTML. And I wonder, like at a practical level on a large site, do you get HTML bloat, or is it just like, is it nominal and you shouldn't worry about it? Because eventually you have large HTML pages with a bunch of classes.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the first person I saw like talk about this was Nicholas Gallagher, who was the guy who created like Normalize, who used to work at Twitter. I think works at Instagram now. He has this blog post called like about HTML semantics and front end architecture, where he talks about this problem a little bit. And he did some tests where he took like an HTML file with tons and tons of classes in it, and then the same HTML file with all the classes removed, and just like compared the size after like HTTP compression. And it just, in his tests, it just like wasn't enough to be
Move the needle.
significant, and I haven't done like tests myself to find out. It would be interesting to really have like something measured where you could say like, yep, this is a problem because it's so much extra stuff in the DOM and it's slower or whatever. But
Right.
I've never noticed that being a problem, and the payloads still seem to be pretty small, but it's a valid concern. Like CSS is cacheable from request to request,
Right.
whereas the HTML is not. So I haven't noticed it being like a bottleneck enough to care about it. You know what I mean? But it would be interesting to really get full scientist on it and
Prove it. Yeah.
come up with some real serious conclusions.
Frost, you've been quiet. Anything kicking around in your head over there, or should we close the show out here?
I'm just wondering how.
One thing, I don't know if you guys knew this. Actually, something I did.
I'm wondering.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's all good. I think I have a lot of latency, like 5 seconds right now. Go ahead.
Somebody be not so polite.
All right. I was wondering how using Tailwind would affect sort of a CSS performance in terms of when you're trying to inline all the critical styles at the top of the page. You have to figure out basically which classes are used in the HTML and just inline that portion of the Tailwind CSS file. And then you put that like in line in a style tag, I guess. That's like sort of the best practice for like making that first page load really, really fast, because then you don't have to sort of go out to the network and wait for that CSS file to come back before the page can be drawn.
Yeah, I know there's definitely some people who are doing that stuff with Tailwind. I haven't actually ever done that on any of my own sites, like done the critical CSS thing, but I know there's this guy, Andrew, that's in the Tailwind community that's like super into that sort of thing, and he's shared solutions for that before. I don't think it's like particularly different than the way that you do it with like any CSS. Like at the end of the day, what you get from Tailwind is still just a regular CSS file. I don't know enough about like how some of the solutions work, because I think the challenges would be the same. Like one of the challenges, I guess this wouldn't actually be a real issue in practice, because like I guess what you do, right, is you inline all the critical CSS and then you put like the actual CSS file like after the critical CSS, so that like it overrides all those same declarations and maintains like the same CSS order, since like the class order is sort of important for specificity stuff. But the same tools should work. Like I'm not sure what the most popular tools are for that. Like I think there's a tool called like critical CSS or something, right? Like
how do you do it, Frost?
Is that like the main?
Oh yeah, there's one that I've used before on BitMidi. I think it's called Purge CSS.
Purge CSS is a little different.
But yeah, it does. It basically, yeah. It like crawls your component files or your template files, depending on what you use, and it looks for stuff that looks like basically any string. It just sort of runs strings on the file, figures out all these strings, and then it's like, if any of these match a class that's in the CSS file, then we'll keep that class, because it may be used, and it's obviously not perfect, but it errs on the side of like of being conservative, and so you'll end up with all the possible classes in that file will be in the
So
exactly.
Purge CSS, I think maybe I misunderstood what you were asking. Purge CSS is like a requirement to use Tailwind at this point, because like the number of combinations of classes that we generate for different colors and breakpoints and hover states and focus states and stuff, Like the default Tailwind build is huge. It's like 3 megs or something in development. So we have like Purge CSS is like integrated into Tailwind now. And we expose like a simpler API on top of it that is sort of like Tailwind aware, so we can like intelligently purge stuff that's safe to purge, but keep stuff that's not safe to purge. So a problem people run into with Purge, if they're just using it manually, for example, is maybe using a library like Flat Picker or Pick-a-Day or something that includes a bunch of CSS in your node modules folder somewhere, or it includes like its own templating stuff deep in like your node modules folder, and you forget to sort of tell Purge to scan that particular folder to find usages of classes. It'll accidentally rip out all those classes. So our integration like makes sure it only is purging like stuff that Tailwind generates, so any custom CSS is always kept just to be as like safe as possible. But yeah, so that's like built right into Tailwind. Now all you have to do is provide like a array of paths to your templates, which is like just like a glob syntax, you know. So for like Next.js, it's like ./pages/*/star.js sort of thing. And in production, it'll strip everything out automatically. So when you do that, most sites will be like, after like Brotli compression, like 4 to 5 kilobytes of CSS instead of like 3 megs of CSS, which is pretty wild. Like even the Tailwind website, which I think it's got to be the biggest production Tailwind CSS file, just because how could it not be?
Every
because
feature.
The whole point of the website is to demo the framework, right? Even that is like, let's see, it's 24 kilobytes compressed. And that demos like every feature in Tailwind is demoed, you know what I mean? But not every single class is demoed, because you don't need to use every single class to demonstrate each feature. Like I don't have to show you that, I don't have to show you how margin left 2 works on every single breakpoint for you to understand how it works. You know what I mean? So there's lots of stuff that we can strip out.
What's a typical site then? If that's like all the kitchen sink, would you say like 10 kilobytes or what?
Less than 10 for sure. Less than 10. Trying to think of like a good one to look at that's that I know is pure Tailwind, because lots of people still end up writing custom CSS. Firefox Send used to be like my go-to one, but they like shut that service down.
That was sad.
And now it doesn't even have like a placeholder page. It just links to like the Mozilla homepage. So
that was a service I never used it, but the fact that it existed, I respected that. You know?
Exactly. I feel the same way. Yeah. Cool. Did you guys know something I can actually do that most other people can't do is that I can fly higher than an eagle?
Wow. Well, I mean, you're really can't even respond to that. Adam broke the show. I think probably that's a good point to end on. I will thank you for putting Tailwind out in the world. We're super excited you're having so much success, you know, especially with building the business around it, because not everybody can do that in open source. And every time we see it, we celebrate it, because that means you can sustainably, reliably, you know, go forward and create more open source goodness for all of us to build upon. And that's awesome. So we are thankful for Tailwind. We're thankful for you coming on the show, putting up with us. And any final thoughts from you, Nick, over there in the peanut gallery? Anything you want to say?
That's it's the tailwind beneath my wings.
Yes. Thank you for putting the tailwind beneath our wings, Adam. That's our show for this week.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for putting up with us, listeners. Thanks for Ross for joining us. Nick was also here, and we'll talk to you next time. Woo!
We did it, guys.
Okay, turns out that was not the best idea we ever had, but you know, when you experiment, sometimes things go terribly wrong. If we can actually, you really threw me for a loop there, Adam, when you dropped that line on me.
I didn't expect you to do that.
I didn't either. If we can put it together and actually have it be with the music behind it, you know, and like open the show with that, I think that the show is going to be awesome. If we can't pull that together very well, and it's a bad implementation, then the show will be a dumpster fire. But you know, that's the risk that we're willing to take here at JS Party.
Yeah.
Jared, have you
Love
ever auto-tuned
All
something
right.
before?
Cool.
No, but I'm looking forward to it. I also need to find the
Yeah,
lyrics
give it a shot.
free version.
That'll-
Yeah. I have to also go back and find all the places where we said those things, so it's gonna require a lot of work for me. So.
Yeah, you got a busy week ahead
Thanks,
of you,
guys.
I think.
Thanks, Nick. It's all Nick's fault. But that's right. K-Ball came up with it, but so we should blame K-Ball. I was gonna say Nick hopped on it right away, but I'm actually guilty of that as well. I thought it was a great idea until we started implementing it. That was fun.
It's funny.
All right. Well, y'all can stop your local recordings. We'll say goodbye to our live audience. Thanks for partying with us. We'll see you guys next week on the live stream.